Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 7 of the Happy Poly Day series. Today, I am joined by Flo and Alexa, who are both polyamory content creators, and today we're going to be talking about compersion, specifically the concept of queering compersion. So Flo is a sex educator, coach, and trainee therapist, and they go by Life with Flo, so Life W Flo on Instagram. And Alexa goes by Polyamory in practice. She is a therapist and a non-monopoly educator. Welcome to Happy Poly Days, Flo and Alexa. I think my first question for the two of you is what was your journey into polyamory? What's kind of your polyamory origin story? And then after that we can kind of go more into what the concept of compersion and kind of your personal experiences with that. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my polyamory origin story, I would say, came to be in end of high school. I was expressing a lot of feelings for my friends as well as being in relationships with people. And I think it was really, really confusing because I didn't have that language, and I don't think anyone really did in high school. So it ended up being kind of like a snowball of different things. And then when I went to college, my freshman year, I got into a very long-term relationship. And I was exposed to that language, and I brought it up in conversation and finally was able to explore polyamory in a much healthier communicative way. So I would say kind of just gradually happened, and freshman year of college was my start introduction to polyamory for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I started kind of my polyamory journey at university as well. So it's really good to kind of hear someone else kind of starting that early on, because you don't actually hear. I think most people kind of they start in long-term relationships or even kind of marriages, much later on. So it's good to kind of hear from people who have started fairly early. What about you, Alexa?
Yeah, so I kind of have a different experience. I think in 2019, my anchor partner now, we had just started dating. We had been dating for about 6 months, I would say. And they brought it up to me as a potential identity of theirs. And I was very much like, you are wild if you think I'm going to do that. I told them, I'll be honest, not proud of it now, but I told them, don't say that word around me. Don't even say the word polyamory around me,
Wow.
Which is really wild. And I think a lot of that was just internalization of the fact that I've been engaging in, I've had polyamorous situations without the name for so long. In high school, I was in a long-term relationship with a man who kind of allowed me to also be emotionally in a relationship and intimately in a relationship with a woman. And so I was kind of doing it without really noticing it. And so when my anchor partner brought it to my attention, they were very patient with me. And I kind of just took a year to educate myself. So we didn't do anything for a year. My anchor partner was very patient. And after that, I realized that I really resonate with these relationship structures and that I had actually been doing it for so long. And my really intense reaction was just rooted in the internalized isms and the internalized stuff that was happening inside of me. And yeah, I think after a year of education, we took those steps, and I have been actively polyamorous ever since.
Yeah, that's so great. I think generally I find that people either start out kind of single, but intentionally kind of seeking a polyamorous dynamic, and then there are others who open up from an existing kind of monogamous relationship. I think those experiences are so different, right? Because in one, you're you're unattached, and you can kind of figure out kind of your boundaries for yourself, but then it's also there's a lot of kind of emotional insecurity with not being able to kind of find partners and kind of navigating the dating world, and that's a whole other thing. And then opening up from an existing monogamous relationship has its own challenges because you're upending the foundations of your relationship, right? There are a lot of things that you need to renegotiate, but then at the same time you also have you know, you're on the same team and like, you know, kind of working together to kind of navigate the space together. And then there is like security to be found there, but also a lot of kind of insecurity in other places. So, you know, like the reason why like I invited the two of you to kind of participate in this like whole thing with me was because there was a post that you two collaborated on together that was making the rounds that was about the kind of concept of queering compersion. And, you know, compersion is very much like a hot topic in the polyamory community, right? Like, I think that a lot of people see it as this milestone and as this, like, you know, the Holy Grail of polyamory, right? Like, yeah. You know, like you've worked through all your jealousy, and now, you know, like when you see your partner with other people, like you feel just this immense joy and happiness and like whatever. And, you know, I felt that your post was very important because it brought to light how, you know, I think compersion can be like a wide variety of experiences and emotions, right? And it doesn't just have to mean like overwhelming joy, but it can be like the narrative can be expanded to include kind of like other emotions and, you know, like kind of neutral experiences as well as positive ones as well. And also kind of particularly deconstructing the dichotomy between polyamory and jealousy. You know, like I've talked about kind of similar stuff before, but I think that the two of you articulated certain concepts in a very, very clever and accessible way. You know, like that, like, you know, it isn't like a spectrum from jealousy to compersion, but rather that, you know, they can coexist, or like, you know, you could, you know, have like one without the other, or, you know, or and it's all kind of a jumble, and it's not necessarily like a linear process of like, you know, you feel a lot of jealousy at the start and then you move along and then you feel like nothing but compersion. Like it doesn't quite work like that. But, you know, like I don't want to speak on behalf of the two of you. I would love to kind of hear from, you know, like you specifically on kind of what you know, what compelled you to kind of like make this post. You know, what were you seeing in the kind of polyamorous community that, like, you know, was that like, you know, like led you to make this post about compersion, and, you know, how it gets mixed up with you know, as the opposite to jealousy, right? And yeah, just kind of your general thoughts on like why you feel compersion like needs to be queered, and how, you know, you're expanding the definition of compersion.
Yeah, so we wanted to like collab on a post a while ago, and it kind of just came up in conversation when we were hanging out that in both of our like relationships and just like our friendships and stuff, we had a lot of expectation to reach this final goal of feeling completely comfortable and 100% positive for everything that went on within like our other partnerships and our metamours and stuff like that too. And just like within discussion at a coffee shop, we were just sitting there like, why do we sit here and think about compersion as this end goal, as this only one way of achieving happiness and like pure joy? And we kind of just like sat there with that question for a while, and when we started really dissecting it and trying to write it down on paper, like why we had these thoughts, we decided that it would be a really, really good thing to share and like discuss in public, and kind of raise that question to everyone else as well. But yeah.
Okay. So yeah, like, you know, like what kind of what do you think that the polyamorous community and kind of just, I guess, mainstream polyamory narratives tend to get wrong about compersion, and kind of what was your post aiming to kind of correct specifically?
Yeah, I think especially in the polyamorous spaces, there is this pressure to reach compersion in order to be polyamorous. Like, oh, once you reach compersion instead of jealousy, suddenly you get your polyamory card in the mail and you can go swipe it and you get to like experience polyamory. And that's where I was for a really long time. I wanted to feel compersion so bad because I thought that was I thought that was going to be the indicator that I'm ready for polyamory. And, you know, what that did was that because the way that I navigated polyamory at the beginning was moving from a monogamous relationship to a polyamorous one with my anchor partner. And I was not pursuing connections at that time. They were pursuing connections and I was focusing on school. And I was, you know, really having a hard time knowing when I'd be ready for that next step because I didn't have this definition of compersion that I was reading about, that I saw online. that I saw on social media, on any media and art that I was consuming that was polyamory oriented. And so my anchor partner waited a really long time to take these steps because I just never felt ready, because I was waiting for compersion. I was waiting for that definition of compersion that just wasn't coming. And I think that that's kind of what Flo and I were talking about at that coffee shop, which was just that that's the rhetoric that's in the polyamorous community right now, you know, in a really non-malicious way. Compersion's beautiful. We all want compersion because it's awesome. It's beautiful. It's a word that has been just developed and cradled by this community, and that there's value in that. And it has created exclusionary situations and feelings for a lot of the community that might not be experiencing it in that way.
Okay, and so then you kind of created this post specifically to kind of combat the narrative that you have to, like, you know, wait to feel this overwhelming joy before like you're ready for polyamory, and you know, like, you know, and it's also possible to be kind of experiencing you know, conflicting emotions, right? Like I think like a comparison that I like to use very often is like, imagine if your friend got a job promotion, you know, or like a new job, right? But then it's also in another state, or another country even, and so, you know, you obviously feel like a lot of joy and happiness for them because like this is like a really great professional opportunity, and they're obviously really happy about it, right? But then at the same time, you know, you feel some kind of bittersweet, like, you know, you feel sad because they're going to be moving away, and then, you know, you might even kind of feel like some level of resentment that like, you know, like this kind of advancement like in their life is coming at the cost of, you know, your friendship, or at least, you know, like there's going to be some changes that are made to your friendship, right? Like, so like positive and negative emotions can exist at the same time, you know, and they can kind of create like a mix of things, you know. It's like oftentimes like when we're like feeling some type of way, like it's usually like a mixture of emotions and thoughts kind of jumbled up together. And I think like like there was like a slide like in your queer compersion post that kind of encompassed, you know, like different kind of bubbles of emotions that like I think really encapsulated that, like, you know, that like compersion isn't just like the one experience of happiness and joy, but it can be excitement, it can be like comfort, it can be you know, it can be quite a lot of different things, and so, you know, you don't have to be waiting for like I am absolutely jumping for joy and now I'm ready. I think it's also unrealistic, right? I think there's going to be stages like at the beginning of opening up a relationship where like, you know, you're going to feel jealous, you're going to feel scared, right? And like that doesn't mean that you should stop doing it necessarily, or that like, you know, you're like not cut out for this or whatever. Like I think there's always going to be the sense of adjustment, right? Like your nervous system is kind of going like, this is not how you do things normally, what is happening? And there's like a sense of danger, right? And then and it takes time to kind of you know, get used to those patterns and for your body to calm down and go like, oh, okay, you know, my partner isn't going to abandon me just because they're spending time with someone else, and it's fine, they keep coming home, and now I feel a bit more settled, and so like I think it's very unrealistic, you know, of kind of like mainstream narratives that for like, you know, people to just jump into polyamory and immediately like be like completely chill with it like from the get-go, and while that is the case for some people, right, you know, for me, like I've always, you know, I've always had very secure attachment. I always kind of, you know, in practicing kind of monogamy or polyamory, like you know, I didn't struggle like a huge amount in the early stages compared to like the average person, and I think that is down to kind of just, you know, like the privilege I had of having like a pretty secure like childhood and family home, and how that kind of contributed to like my adult relationships, right? But not everyone has those privileges, and I think people ignore that. Like people just assume that everyone is starting from the same place of like, you know, like security and like mental stability, and then that like so and in that way I feel like you know, mainstream kind of polyamory education doesn't really take into account like mental health or like, you know, people with histories of trauma, and you know how that can affect like their ability to feel compersion, or whether like, you know, they like, or like how they experience jealousy and that kind of thing. and I'm sure in both of you are Alexa, you're a therapist, like Flo, you're a therapist in training, like I'm sure you've kind of come across this as well, how like our trauma histories can like impact how we experience jealousy and compersion, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important that you said it's kind of an unattainable or unrealistic part of compersion that the polyamory community holds as a standard, just because even in our day-to-day, like even in our conversation, we were talking about how in my experiences, I never felt an extreme jealousy or an extreme happiness. It was very neutral, which is why we like brought in that neutrality of it too, because you don't have to sit there and think about it 24 hours a day and be like, oh, I'm so joyful that my partners are like getting along or that they're having amazing dates. You can just be comfortable and willing to listen and provide space for them, and then just go about your day. It doesn't have to be a thing that's constantly on your mind or that you achieve and like always have with you. It's very much timeless and you move through it in different ways.
Yeah. And I think another aspect of it as well is that like another thing that I feel that mainstream polyamory kind of gets wrong is that jealousy is something that you just work through at the start and then it's just gone forever. And like I think that there's a couple of layers to this, right? Because as your circumstances change, like your relationships change, like then like jealousy can crop up in some situations, not in others. Like some situations may feel more activating or triggering, right? And it's not like, oh, we've worked kind of through this thing and like no matter how things change in our relationship, like this emotion is never going to come up again. Like that's unrealistic, right? We wouldn't say that about sadness or anger. Like it just kind of comes up in situations that cause sadness or anger. And I think also that like I think the polyamorous community tends to frame jealousy as an internal issue, right? It's always something that you need to work on within yourself. And something that I have been bringing quite a lot of attention to, like in my recent posts, is that like there are definitely situations where like your jealousy is 100% rooted in reality and is completely justified, right? Because jealousy a lot of the time is like a sense of loss. It's a fear of loss. It's a fear of like abandonment. It's like alerting you that like there are needs that are not being met in your relationship, right? And these are external things. It's not if your partner is continuing to neglect you and deprioritize you and abandon you, like no matter how much you like process your emotions, like they're still going to be there because like that external problem is still present and still happening. So at that point, it's actually counterintuitive to try and like process and work through the jealousy, because what you're doing at that point is like numbing yourself to like what your body is telling you about, like, hey, there's like things that should be addressed here like externally, and it's not just like an internal trauma or insecurity, but that can be difficult to distinguish. So so like this kind of like binary where it's like, oh, there's if you have jealousy then you don't have compersion, if you have compersion then you have no jealousy, is like it's an unhelpful model. And I think like the your post like really did well to like bring attention to that. And I think it's kind of related to like how jealousy can crop up in all kinds of situations, no matter how many years you've been practicing polyamory. And you can have like issues with compersion depending on like the person that your partner is dating. For example, like if you for like a very easy example is like if you don't get along with your metamour, or like if your metamour is like being quite disrespectful towards you, or there's been kind of conflict, you might struggle to feel compersion compared to like a partner who like a metamour who you really got along with, and you could see like how like they fit with your partner, and how like how good they are for each other, and how they contribute positively to your partner's life, right? And then in that situation you'd be like, oh, I'm super happy for you. But if you had a metamour who wasn't like that, obviously you would struggle a bit more. So it's not like, it's not a linear process, it's not like a timeline. And so like I really liked the kind of like squiggly jumble thing that you did like in your diagram, where you were just like, these are all it's you queer the timeline of compersion, like there shouldn't be kind of like a linear expectation. So like I guess like like my question for you is what have your kind of personal experiences been with compersion? Like how how would you describe your personal experience of compersion? Or I guess it depends on like situations you're in, but I'd love to kind of hear more about like you know, like what emotions like crop up for you when you are experiencing compersion. I say this, I ask this because I think I want to show people like the diversity of ways in which compersion can be experienced between the three of us. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I was actually just talking about like the feeling of compersion with one of my partners recently. And I engage in a lot of like kink spaces with one of my partners, and more recently, like we've been having these discussions of having other play partners and just like sharing interactions that we've come across. And I will say, like a couple of days ago, my first like more recent feeling of compersion was looking at a text that my partner sent me from some other person, and I was like, how exciting, like I kind of wish I was you in this spot right now. And then it was also coupled with a little bit of like, ooh, like what if it's more fun for them? Like what will I do? But that's something that I had to process on my own as well, you know, like there's the excitement and the like stress at the same time, and then having to like sit back and really be like, you know what, like I'm super happy for you in this moment, and I'm going to take my time to really process this. So that was the most recent thing for me. But I also think you can experience compersion with your friendships, and like like how you're mentioning with your friends, like moving, getting a new job and stuff like that. And I feel like that's the most common way that we see compersion in monogamous spaces. So yeah, that was my most recent experience, and it was fun.
I love that we're talking about this. I love that we're going to talk about the diversity of compersion, because it's just so vast, and we don't talk about it enough. So people, I found myself questioning, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing polyamory right? I experience a lot of compersion with my anchor partner because of that, you know, kind of what you were talking about, Leanne, that secure attachment. And then I experience more jealousy with like newer connections, and less compersion with newer connections, because I'm like, okay, like I thought we were getting to know each other, you know. But at the end of the day, I also do feel a lot of compersion over time, irregardless of who it is, which is why, you know, taking space is super, super valid. I thought I had to, and I'm just going to speak for myself, but I thought I had to like really reconnect with my partner and my partners after each, I guess, like endeavor they have had with other folks. But I realized like, maybe I just need space, and then I can feel compersion. So taking space before, you know, trying to, allowing yourself some space before you put that pressure on, oh, I'm not feeling compersion right now. I also experience compersion differently depending on like the activity, which is really interesting. Like if my anchor partner is trans, and so when they spend their time with other trans folks, that brings me a lot of like warm comfort, and just like this feeling of like, I guess I can only describe it as like drinking like hot tea. Like it feels warm, like, oh, I'm so happy. Like this is something that like I don't give them as their cis partner, but they can get in other spaces. And that's just really, really powerful. I think that warm feeling of compersion is kind of the first time where I was really, really juiced about compersion. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I think, well, it's not a spectrum, but on the other side of the big squiggle that we were talking about, is the compersion that's just more neutral, like what Flo is saying. I experience this a lot in my friendships. I have really great friends who have partners, and when they're telling me about their relationships, their experiences with their partners, sometimes I experience a really neutral form of compersion, like, oh, it's really great. I don't feel like I'm jumping up and down with joy for them. And that might be because there's some other stuff. Maybe I'm experiencing some jealousy. But it comes up a lot in my friends in heterosexual relationships. I get really juiced about my friends in queer relationships, but when I'm hearing about a heterosexual time, sometimes I feel more just neutral, then definitely my community is just so close to my heart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to touch on what you said, Alexa, about kind of how you you feel a lot of compersion with your anchor partner, but with newer partners you feel more jealousy. And I really don't think that this is talked about enough, because like I absolutely feel this too.
Right.
Like a couple months ago, like I had like a a dalliance, shall we say, with someone. Unfortunately, that connection didn't end up lasting very long. But at the very start, like I found myself like getting like very weirdly possessive of this person, and that was because, and I was very surprised at myself. I was like, I've been actively non-monogamous like since I was like 17. It's been 6 years. Like, what, how is this, how are these feelings coming up for me now? Like, I thought I worked through this, but then what I realized was that like the reason why I was feeling this way, because like he was telling me about like a date that he had with someone else, and immediately I was like and I realized it was because like him and I hadn't gotten to know each other like extremely well, and so then in the early stages like of our connection, like I felt that it was easier for me to be replaced because we were still kind of in the dating stage and nothing was like set in stone. Like, whereas I don't feel that with like my anchor partner, because we like we've been together for 3 years, like we've got like an established kind of rapport, established bond, we've got like established kind of commitments to each other, and like I don't feel very threatened by that, because like I know that like I know that he feels very seriously about me, and that like we very much kind of see like the value that we each kind of bring to each other in our relationship. So so that was like a weird time for me, because like I had to kind of work through like, wait, I thought I was good at this. Like, and then suddenly realizing no, like there is a reasoning why like I'm feeling this way. And I do also think, I have a theory, right? And like perhaps like the two of you can weigh on this, since like you're therapists and a therapist training. I do think that like how much kind of jealousy someone feels like with, or compersion, I guess, like with established versus new partners, differs depending on like whether you experience like anxious or avoidant attachment.
Hell yeah.
So here's my theory. So like I'm generally securely attached, but then like in kind of moments of like activation, in particular situations, I think like I lean more towards anxious, and so like so then like I feel more anxious with new partners, because like we haven't found our footing in the relationship, and then so like I struggle to feel compersion, and I feel a bit more jealousy. But I've spoken to some other people who are avoidantly attached, right? And they say that they feel more jealousy and less compersion with established partners, but then they are able to feel a lot of compersion for people that they haven't gotten to know that well yet. And I wonder if it's because like avoidance like are typically kind of stereotyped to like like I think there is the kind of like that fear, like vulnerability and intimacy. There is that when kind of triggering situations happen, there is the urge to kind of like shut down and run away, hence like the term avoidant, right? And then so in that sense, with more established partners, like while an anxiously attached person would feel like more secure, like they would feel like more like insecure, like the kind of the more like attached they are. Am I making any sense? That's kind of my theory. Like, so what do you think about that?
I'll let you go first because I'm still in training.
Yeah, well, I will say that I was trained, my supervisor is a psychodynamic therapist, which is essentially the theory that's all about attachment. And so I've had a lot of training in attachment, and I'm all, I don't know anything, because theory is also complex and of course and deep, but I do know that if there's one thing that shapes you, it is your attachment, and it is your attachment style. And that is just so salient for the rest of your life. And, that's not an end all be all. You're not only your attachment style, and there are ways to navigate it. There are ways to hold space for it, create space for it. We're not trying to change our attachment style. We're trying to show ourselves self-compassion, but I think it's so valid to just really be shaped by your attachment style. I can definitely speak to the anxiously attached folks out there, because that's me. I am like textbook definition, anxiously attached abandonment issues. And it's so hard with newer folks because it's so hard there's just that constant fear of abandonment, just that it's kind of just like circling around. And, typically, this is also just theory, but typically in what we see is avoidantly attached people tend to appear more stable. And so anxiously attached folks are drawn to that. So they'll be drawn to avoidantly attached folks, and then they will pull, and they will push. And then that kind of causes some kind of riff. And so I think it's also another big like bubble squiggle, not a spectrum. And there's nothing wrong with either attachments. And some other stuff that I've heard in the polyamorous community is that anxiously attached folks have a really hard time being polyamorous and they can't. And that's just not true. We can still do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Would
you add anything?
I mean, I've definitely been trained in a completely different perspective. So as far as the training that I've had thus far, I would say that it's a very colonial approach to think about of like our upbringing within attachment styles, specifically leading to how we interact as adults due to our childhood. And I would say that if anything, I would focus more on community versus individualistic perspectives of how we attach and relate to other humans. But honestly, I'm still in training.
But no, there's I think there's so much validity to what you're saying. And we often look at attachment style as who raised you. And that is when we talk about attachment style, we do think of a mom and a dad, which is that colonial mindset. Folks who are raised by their community or raised in more collective styles have more opportunity for secure attachment and have more opportunity for safe spaces, safe attachment styles.
Completely. I completely agree with you. And I think Jessica Fern actually kind of touched on this in her book Polysecure, right? Like when she was talking about her kind of model of attachment kind of encompassed, like not just, your like within like the personal kind of family home, but also like within like your wider community, and then within like the country that you live in, and then within like the global kind of stuff, like I think like how climate change and stuff like that can contribute to like kind of personal insecurity and like existential dread and all that kind of stuff like that, and that can affect attachment, right? Like I think that I'm going to be covering this topic like later on with like in 2 days time with Femia and anti-mononormative, like about kind of polyamory and Gen Z, and how like basically we feel that the younger generation of Gen Z, like the kids who are currently teenagers, are actually swinging back to kind of more like traditional, like perhaps even kind of conservative and like right-wing models of relationships, because like they grew up with so much like insecurity about like in the pandemic and like the climate and like like protests and like political like whatever, and so like they find kind of stability in something like very traditional heterosexual monogamy, and that's kind of informed by our perspectives on like just our TikTok comment sections, because like a lot of the most awful things that people have said to me like on TikTok have been from like 13-year-olds, and they're like really traditional kind of perspective of going like polyamory is wrong and it should be man and woman, whatever, and it's like, whoa, like what is going on here, like I thought like the kids were woke. And so anyway, like that was a bit of a tangent, but I'm bringing that back to kind of try and say like I do think that attachment is so much more than like how we're shaped by like our home, but also by our community and like our like financial situations and kind of like so many other things as well. So yeah, like I think that's like a really important point for you to have made. So I'm going to answer, because since I kind of asked you about kind of how you experience compersion, like I'm kind of answer for like my own question as well. Like I mean, like I've also had like very varied experiences of compersion, and I think like it also highly depends on you know, like how, like what my relationship is like with my partner's partner. You know, I usually find it much easier to kind of experience compersion like if like I know something about them, or like, you know, have even kind of gotten to know them like on a more personal level. And in the past, you know, some metamours have like struggled to kind of like connect with me, or like, you know, sometimes don't even want to connect with me at all. And there have kind of been feelings around that, but then, you know, over time I think obviously you have to learn to like accept other people's boundaries, and, you know, to kind of like work through your own stuff, right? Because we can't just kind of be doing whatever we want and expecting other people to like just like bend to like our desires. And you know, like I think like my compersion is also to an extent like tied into um feelings of arousal, actually. And that's an interesting, because like I think that you know, as well as being polyamorous, like my partner and I are swingers, and we're very much like exhibitionists. You know, like we're like reasonably kinky, and we like going to kind of like sex parties together and that kind of thing. And I really enjoy like watching my partner like engage sexually with other people. And you know, this is not everyone's cup of tea, right? Like, you know, I think some people are like happy kind of watching their partners like, you know, engaging in like your PDA, like, you know, kissing in public, and just kind of being generally like physically affectionate. But then a lot of people would draw the line at like actually seeing their partner like, you know, like engaging sexually with someone else. So, you know, my perspective is very much kind of like my own individual, like, you know, comfort levels and boundaries and that kind of thing. But you know, like I really enjoy like seeing my partner with other people because it turns me on.
Yeah.
And you know, and so that has been like a good time for me, because like I see, you know, what things that my partner is like picking up, like, or like through learning other people's bodies, and like what kind of new techniques and skills that he's learning that like we can take back to like our own life, you know. And so, you know, like, or while like obviously I still kind of feel like a lot of joy and comfort, you know, seeing kind of my partner have a good time with someone else. Like at the moment, you know, I'm quarantining in Hong Kong, and he is in the UK, and he's going on dates with other people. He's telling me about like, you know, how like they went and visited this new bar, like when they went to see this show. And you know, I feel like I feel a lot of joy and happiness that like he's able to, you know, like have fun and socialize with other people, like, you know, like while I'm over here and he isn't feeling lonely. There is an aspect of it where I'm like, oh, I wish I was there with you. But then, you know, like again, you know, two emotions can exist at the same time. But yeah, like back to what I said, like, you know, I think like compersion is, you know, in some scenarios like tied to like arousal. For me is tied to like a, you know, like almost like a voyeurism kink. And I think that's also completely valid, and people like don't talk about that very much, because I feel like the polyamorous community has like a weird aversion to talking about sex, because we want to very much talk about how polyamory is not about the sex.
Not sex.
And then in doing so, we kind of swing back in the other direction, where like I have found some polyamorous people to be like very weirdly sex negative, where they're like, if you engage in group sex, you are not like truly polyamorous, because you're like doing, and I'm like, bro, like, you know, you know, sex is a very big part of how I love, and I very much want to push back against this narrative that like polyamory is not about the sex, because I think it can be, right? It's just not all of what it is, right? There's like very hypersexual polyamorous like me, and then there's asexual polyamorous, or people with like low libido or whatever, you know, like, and there's like a whole spectrum. I think the whole point is connection and intimacy, right? So yeah, like, you know, my experience of compersion is kind of tied in with that aspect of things. And I think the fact that like I enjoy seeing my partner like engage sexually with other people definitely makes things easier for me, in terms of like, otherwise I think I might get in my head about like comparisons of like our bodies, or, you know, like feeling inadequate if like someone is able to kind of satisfy like a kink of his that like I'm not into, or something like that, you know. But for me it's just like I'm glad that like you're kind of getting things from other people, that like you're like enriching and, you know, fulfilling your life in that sense. I do think like a healthy amount of like empathy comes into it as well. Like I think that when you start being able to see your partner's successes as your own, rather than engaging in this competitiveness with your partner, like not just competition with your partner's other partner, but also competition with your own partner regarding your own dating lives, right? Because I think some people can get into this thing where it's like, well, you get a date, I have to get a date as well, we have to go out and date at the same time, tit for tat. And that can get into like a weird space, like where like, you know, you end up like objectifying other people as like tallies on a scoreboard, and also, you know, engaging competition with your partner over you know, something as complex as dating. But yeah, so I think it's about kind of, I think like one thing that's really key to kind of you know, developing like healthy kind of compersion, or, you know, neutrality, or kind of whatever kind of space you would like to get to, you know, comfort, right, is, you know, breaking down that sense of competitiveness with other people, or like with your partner, and then, you know, recognizing that you're a team, you're in this together, and that like they you know, their wins are your wins, and like their wins kind of contribute to the happiness of your relationship, and like their sense of fulfillment in themselves and your relationship as a whole. And it all kind of, you know, they all influence each other, they all benefit each other. And I think that's like the really key thing, because I think if you experience a lot of competitiveness and you're always kind of keeping score, and you know, like just being very calculating, I can imagine that feeling compersion would, you know, would be like a struggle in that kind of mindset. Do you have any kind of anything to add to that? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said was beautiful too, just because in the sum of it, what I hear is that to some extent, like kink is also teaching us how to live vicariously through our partners.
Yes.
And it can teach us so much about not only like consent and focusing on our own boundaries and perspectives during these times, and adjusting to like our own bodily needs and soothing, but it can just like give us an opportunity to live vicariously through our partners, experience that compersion in the live space, and kind of just figure out what you need in the moment. And yeah, a lot of people that I've encountered in polyamorous spaces have been very sex negative, to the point where it's like, oh, if you go for just sex, or you just hook up with someone, or you have an immediate attraction, you're not doing polyamory correct, because it's all about this one love and attainability of love, and to feel that compersion. And I think like honestly, having one specific definition of even just compersion or polyamory, anything within our community, is not the right way to go, which is why like we wanted to queer compersion, because there's so many ways to look at everything in our community, that standing by so firmly of one definition is definitely going to exclude a lot of people and leave a lot of things out that we as human beings feel and like experience as multifaceted people. So yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah. Everything you said, just amazing.
Yes, I love it. And you know, Flo, you're bringing up such a good point of terminology, and how terminology is used against the community. And sometimes I had an experience where I was speaking to someone who practices what they call polyamory, and their definition of polyamory is they have an anchor partner, and then they engage sexually with other folks, one night stands, folks they meet at the bars, folks they meet at concerts, folks they meet at school, but they don't necessarily date them. And people have been really belittling them, saying that's not polyamory, that's an open relationship, or that's non-monogamy, but you can't call it polyamory. And I think even just that rigidity in the term, you know, your definition of polyamory is your definition of polyamory. Polyamory is a practice. It's also an identity. If you want to claim it as both, you can. Just as in the queer community, we have terms. The terms aren't used to label us. They're not used to, you know, force us into these boxes, but instead should just give us freedom if we want to label different facets of our identity, and also just ways to communicate about this, ways to talk about this in everyday language, because we deserve to have that kind of treatment of just being in the conversation about relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is, you know, there is a gray area, like, right, between like what is classified as polyamory, what is classified as like just, you know, non-monogamy. And while like I do think the distinction is important, because I think like the last thing that a polyamorous person wants is to like engage with someone who, you know, is only like sexually open but like romantically monogamous, and then to kind of find out very, very late in the line, right? So which is why I think it's important for people to like actually kind of clarify what their boundaries are, rather than throw around labels that might mean different things to different people. You know, this is what I encourage all the time. You know, even things like, you know, what does commitment mean to you? What does the phrase I love you mean to you? Like, what does cheating mean to you? And to like define that in your relationship, rather than going like, yeah, don't cheat on me. Like, okay, like what does that mean? And so yeah, like I think with kind of polyamory, non-monogamy, it's kind of similar stuff as well. Like I do like to make this distinction, because I think that I think polyamory as well has a bit of a political history regarding kind of like the free love movement and all that kind of stuff. That and I do think that the practice is certain kind of I don't want to say like sex, but like, you know, sections like of the like swinging communities very much like uphold like very like heteronormative standards still, you know. I definitely like, while like I do identify as a swinger, and I do love swinging, I do love going to sex parties, like there are definitely some swinging communities that are like very heteronormative, where it's like, you know, mostly like straight couples engaging with each other with a little like, you know, like femme on femme for spice, and it's like, and you know, and I think like polyamorous people like would, you know, reject that like as kind of being included within polyamory. So I think the distinctions are important still.
Right.
But like,
right.
I do understand like what you mean, you know, like I think, you know, there are gray areas, right? Like I definitely know there are some swingers who have very long-term intimate relationships with other couples, and even if they don't necessarily define them as romantic, right, they are very intimate, they are long-term, and they are committed. And so like, okay, well, is that polyamory? You know, because it's like, you know, these are 4 people, right, and they've been with each other like a long time, and they're very, very close, right? They've built like a community. But you know, is it just because like they you know primarily kind of meet up to have group sex, like is that poly, you know? So there are, you know, there is overlap, and I think that's kind of recognizing that nuance is important.
Yeah, and something I want to add is just the example I was talking about earlier. The person has a very like relationship anarchist type of viewpoint, where they express they love these people because in their experiences, you know, sex is love. And so I think that it like you were saying, it's just really the definition of what love is to you. And I think that that's, you know, the most important piece is, are you communicating? Is it consensual? And are there boundaries that are being followed? And when we have these labels, you know, labels are just literal link, they're just words without, they have no meaning unless there's consent, communication, and boundaries.
And I think that's the most important part too, like the difference between figuring out how you and your partners operate with these definitions and this terminology versus how you operate when you're policing other people and engaging in a very exclusive construction of polyamory to the point of like harming other folks. As long as no one's being harmed and you're deciding what works for you and like what other people view polyamory as and how that fits into your correlation and your relationship, then it's okay. But the policing aspect of it, I think, is what really draws people to feel, especially with compersion, feel excluded or feel like they can't achieve it, like it's an unattainable thing, because there is so many strict boundaries and outlines of what compersion should look like.
Yeah, no, completely. I completely agree with you. So, you know, so I asked the 2 of you to kind of collate some questions from followers kind of related to like compersion and jealousy and like all this kind of good stuff. And so we do have, you know, like a couple of things that followers like wanted us to discuss. And I think like one thing that'd be really interesting to touch on is like navigating like differences in kind of experiences of compersion with, you know, you and your partner or you and your metamour. So, and how kind of conflict kind of rises like within polycules, if, you know, one partner is more jealous than the other, or like one person is more compersive than the other, and you know, how we go about navigating that. So yeah, so like what do you think about that topic in general? Do you have any personal experiences around like, you know, you experiencing more compersion than your metamour, them experiencing more than you, and how that's like, you know, played out like in kind of various scenarios?
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of experience with this. I tend to be the person who feels more compersion generally and is more like, I guess I hate labeling it like this, but like more chill in a stance. I don't usually experience an extreme form of jealousy, and usually I'm very internalized when I do experience it. I process it on my own. So in my past relationships, I would have small conflicts where my partners would not feel as much compersion for each other. And I think what it came down to was navigating conversations between those partners, between metamours, because the polyamorous person who's dating, maybe even in like a V shape is what I would have called it, can't always be the person communicating or striving to make the effort to include compersion or just help people feel compersion along the way. I think that metamours have to put in just as much work as the polyamorous people who are dating multiple people.
Completely.
Yeah, so I, as a person who didn't feel as much jealousy and felt compersion really easily, I also had to be aware of my boundaries and the way I was reflecting my compersion back to my partners, because it could be triggering in some ways for me to be joyous at all moments when we needed to process collectively. So it's very much just an ongoing conversation of how and when is the space to discuss this, and what capacity everyone is at to maybe address that they're at different positions in their polyamorous journey.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Just the what is best for everyone involved in terms of sitting down and having these discussions. I think what came up for me is I definitely haven't had any kind of conflict with a metamour in my own personal experience, but there wasn't a situation. There was a situation of just, I think my metamour not feeling honestly like they were allowed to talk about their compersion and their jealousy, creating so much space for me and for my anchor partner, and just not really feeling their own value in the relationship and their own power in the relationship. And I think that really encouraged me and my anchor partner to really open up safe spaces for discussion, because you can, you can feel your feels, you can feel your compersion, you can feel your jealousy. And if you want to bring that up, it's important to really prioritize what a safe space looks like for you to bring that up. And so I think that that's one thing that I really took away, was creating really safe, open spaces for folks to discuss their compersion and their jealousy without punishment, no one, without judgment too. There is no, like, kind of Flo and I's goal. There is no one way to experience this, and it's okay to not have it all figured out, and that's something that we can sit down and do together.
Yeah, completely. I think that like a really good point that both of you brought up was kind of the appropriate time and space to kind of bring up compersion and jealousy, or to express compersion or jealousy. Like I like, similar to you, Flo, like I've tended to be like the more compersive one, like in my relationships with my partners or my metamours. And like I've definitely, like I definitely messed up like in the past, like where I was I was not mindful of like how my partners and metamours were feeling about the situation. I was just like they're like bouncing off the walls and just being like and then everyone's just like, oh god, this makes me feel bad because like I'm not there yet, and like what does this mean about me, what does this mean about like my relationships and that kind of thing. Like, well, our mutual partner think differently of me because like he has one partner who's more chill with it and I'm struggling with it, and there's a lot of kind of competitiveness and kind of insecurity and stuff like around that, right? And so like I do absolutely think that there is like a time and place to kind of express that, right? And if your partner's having a bad time, you don't want to be like going like, like I'm like joyous, and it's like, no, okay, like there's you can kind of express your emotions in kind of like more compassionate ways. Like don't suppress it, don't tamp it down, don't pretend it's not there, obviously, but then like there are ways to like express emotions, whether positive or negative, right? Whether it's like a joy or sadness or anger, there are healthy ways to express that, and considerate and tactful ways to express that, without kind of and being mindful of your partner's triggers and kind of current emotional state. And I think another thing that like, because so far, like in this conversation we've talked a lot about like working like towards compersion, I guess, or like in what situations like we would feel more compersion, but then I also kind of want to bring up the flip side of like when you experience too much compersion, and like this is probably like not like the most relatable experience, but I do think it's still important to cover, because like sometimes like my compersion has been overwhelming for people. It has been really kind of disorienting even, like I said, in the past, like if I've been like really happy and kind of I have a metamour who's been kind of struggling with it, then that can kind of bring up feelings of like insecurity or like inadequacy in the other person, which I've not been mindful to, and I think like it's also important not to let your compersion turn into like an invasion of your partner's privacy. Like sometimes I can get so overexcited about like my partner dating other people, and I want to hear details because it makes me like really feel very happy to hear about it, that like I end up massively intruding on like what my metamour wants me to know, right? And so like I think it's very important to talk boundaries in that situation as well, because you don't want to be so the term that I use, and this is not a term that I coined, it's a term that I believe Page Turner of the Polyland blog coined, a compervert, which is like basically like someone who it feels so much compersion, like to the point of like low-key like objectifying like other people, because like they like really like feed off that energy in the other relationships to feel this sense of happiness and joy, right? And particularly, I think it's particularly applicable to me, given that like my compersion is sometimes tied in with arousal, and obviously there is a time and a place to objectify people, right? And that has to be carefully negotiated and that kind of thing. So I think it's important to kind of talk about the flip side. There are people who struggle with not experiencing compersion and feeling like a lot of jealousy, and then there are people who are in the middle, right? Who kind of just generally kind of experience neutrality about it, and they don't feel one way or the other. And then there are people like me who have the opposite problem completely. So yeah, like I think those are all kind of important things to discuss. Yeah, so the conclusion with all that is like being mindful of your partner's emotional state, like if you're having a good time and they're having a bad time, like, and having to navigate that. And then also understanding that different people have different perspectives on something that you might feel a lot of joy about, your partner may not, and vice versa. And it isn't so much kind of good and bad, or like how like how evolved or like progressive you are like on your journey, because it take keeping in mind like our personal upbringings, like our trauma histories, and like our attachment style and various other factors that contribute to like whether or not we're able to experience compersion and jealousy, and how much of it we experience, and like the timeline of that, and that kind of thing. But yeah, like like honestly, like I feel like this is such a rich topic that like we could talk about forever, and I feel like there's so much to be said for like how compersion doesn't have to be this holy grail. It doesn't have to be this thing that like you have to get like in order to kind of get your polyamory card, like as you said, Alexa, and how like people can function perfectly fine in polyamory without ever experiencing compersion. I think as long as you get to a point where like you're not feeling like majorly kind of like distressed and cut up about something, like as long as you're able to appreciate like your partner's journey like being beneficial to them, and you're able to kind of like feel like some level of kind of acceptance and fulfillment from both of you like seeing other people and that kind of thing, like compersion is not necessary. And I think it's time for people to be able to kind of free themselves from the narrative that like they need to like work towards it. It's more like, well, it's like a nice bonus, right? It's a nice bonus and is a nice thing to feel. And obviously like we all like everyone wants to feel nice things. But then like if you're not jumping for joy, like if you're just kind of going like about the whole thing, that's fine too, and that is completely valid, like as long as you feel empowered in the decisions that you're making, and you're engaging in like ethical consensual relationships and all that jazz. So I think that's all we have time for today in terms of kind of talking about jealousy and compersion and all that stuff like within polyamory. I thought that your post was really valuable, like Flo and Alexa, and I think that it's definitely like a springboard for people to queer compersion and to deconstruct the idea, like the binary of compersion and jealousy, and it's definitely something that I would love for more people to discuss in future. And I think that was like a really great kind of starting point. So this has been a really amazing chat, and I've really enjoyed speaking with both of you, hearing your perspectives and experiences on compersion. So where can people find you? So you're both on Instagram, but are there any other platforms that you're on? Please tell the audience kind of where people can find more of your work.
Yeah, so my handle is the same for Twitter, TikTok, and my Instagram, lifewflow. I also have a website, lifewithflow.com.
And I just have my Instagram.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's been great speaking with both of you. And I hope that people have learned a lot from, from our kind of chats about compersion and jealousy within polyamory. Thank you so much. And I hope to kind of work with you more in the future. Yeah, thank you.
Always.
All right, bye.